There is concern that U.S. government employees are enforcing the laws of the Chinese Communist Party on American soil. This includes attacks on some of the core tenets of a free society: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of belief. This was highlighted in a recent incident right here in Chicago. On March 11th, a U.S. citizen was traveling through Chicago O'Hare International Airport. She was stopped by a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer. She was then allegedly questioned on her religious beliefs, accused of engaging in politics, and then harassed for her employment in a New York-based performing arts company. The customs officer still remains unknown, although he spoke with a mainland Chinese accent. And what the man appeared to be enforcing was not the laws of the United States, it was the laws of the Chinese Communist Party. The woman who was stopped was Teresa Du, who works for Shenyun Performing Arts, a world-renowned performing arts company based in New York. They had just finished performing in Germany and were traveling to Chicago to perform at the Rosemont Theater. We met with her there to learn more. Can you explain to me what happened when you encountered this U.S. Customs agent?
When I went in, it was a customs officer of Asian descent, and then as I was in there, I overheard him saying to his colleague that they're Falun Gong and they're political. It was kind of like shocking because, usually I've never had that happen to me before. A customs officer is supposed to be very neutral because they're part of the federal government. It was just the way that he was saying it was so mocking, and it just made me feel very uncomfortable. But then you're supposed to respect the customs officers, right? So I just pretended like I didn't hear it, and then I just let him start with the customs procedures. And then so he looked over at me, and then he spoke in Chinese. And actually Chinese isn't my first language. My first language is English. And so I was not comfortable with that, and it kind of felt like the way that he was asking me was trying to get me to speak in Chinese to show people that I was Chinese or something. It felt very uncomfortable. And so he asked me what group are you in? And then at that time he was also muttering Shenyun in a very mocking way. And then so I said, oh, we're Shenyun Performing Arts in Chinese. And then he asked me where we came from, and then I said Germany in Chinese as well. And then he asked me how many members were in our group. At this point in time, I felt kind of uncomfortable speaking in Chinese for that long. So I started speaking in English, and then I said around 70. And then afterwards, he started speaking in English to me again. And then so he said really loudly, actually, are you being sponsored by the Falun Gong? And then I was kind of shocked, This wasn't the kind of confrontation that I felt was supposed to happen in a customs border. It felt a little bit inappropriate. So I just told him I don't think I need to answer that question. He just looked at me and then kind of humped and stuff, and then he just wrote something, and then he let me go. And then so I was waiting at past the borders area. I noticed that my member was still there, and then there was no officer there. So then I just wanted to stay there and then make sure she was going to get out okay. At this point in time, I also heard the customs officer of Chinese descent. He said to his colleagues that they're Falun Gong, they're political, and they're illegal. So it just kind of made me feel what am I supposed to say about this? You're supposed to just let, I don't know, it just made me feel so uncomfortable and a little bit upset because, in America, there's the freedom of belief, and you can believe anything, but then why is he slandering us? We're not, we're not political, and we're not illegal. I think it might have been religious discrimination because he was so against the fact that we were Falun Gong, something that, is illegal in China with the Communist Party, but then it's not illegal here in America. And I think that's what was affecting him.
We met with others who had a similar experience dealing with this customs officer and actually other customs officers. What happened with the encounter with this customs agent?
It felt like all the officers were talking amongst themselves, talking about how they were skeptical about us.
Was it just this Chinese officer, or were there similar things from the other customs officers?
Actually, yes. The officer in front of me, after he was typing on his computer, he asked me, "Oh, are you guys associated to the Falun Gong group?" And then at first I was a bit shocked because I've never been asked that before.
So what was your encounter with this customs officer?
This Chinese custom officer was walking around, like there was a lot of cubicles, and then suddenly he called out to like another officer 2 meters away, I would say. He was like, "Oh, Falun Gong, these people are Falun Gong." He was saying in a very negative way, kind of. Yeah, and then suddenly all the other custom officers were like taking a long time and then asking for a lot of other documents that usually won't be necessary for a normal like custom.
Immigration lawyer Jason Zubao explained that while there still needs to be an official investigation, if the allegations are true, the customs agent may at the very least be guilty of discrimination.
The action of the officer was clearly inappropriate if that's what turns out that actually happened. I think there will have to be an investigation of this because it's the job of the officers, of course, to inspect people when they come in and make sure that they're eligible to enter the United States, but they're certainly not allowed to question them about inappropriate topics or try to exclude them from the United States based on their political views or their religious beliefs or for any other inappropriate reason. And if these officers were working under the influence of the Chinese regime, that really would be a shocking development. There are background checks and a pretty extensive background check for CBP officers, for other agents within the U.S. government, because you can imagine lots of examples where the government of China would do well for itself to plant people within the U.S. government, asylum officers, USCIS officers, any position within the government. And it's targeted at many different groups, but the Falun Gong is one group that certainly has been targeted over the years within the United States, and it's important for the U.S. government to be aware about that and to try to actively prevent such threats.
Ms. Du has since filed an official complaint over the incident with Customs and Border Protection. We contacted CBP, which declined to speak on camera, but a CBP spokesperson said in a written statement that CBP strictly prohibits profiling on the basis of race or religion. But concerns over the incident go beyond just the possibility of discrimination. The bigger concern is how this incident fits into a broader trend, where the Chinese Communist Party has been attacking Shenyun and aggressively trying to prevent the American company from performing. While the motives of the customs officer remain unclear, there is a broader concern. What took place in Chicago fits into a pattern of similar incidents and findings. The secret Chinese police stations found operating in the United States, campaigns of harassment through the Chinese consulates, threats of intimidation from Chinese agents, and even concerns that individuals working in official positions within the U.S. government could be acting on policies from the Chinese Communist Party. Several members of Congress are now calling for investigations into this incident. They outlined their concerns during interviews with NTD's Capitol Report.
It's exceptionally concerning. Based on the reports, it looks like the Chinese Communist Party is now, at least in one individual, in charge of customs and border protection for people coming back to the United States from abroad that are United States citizens, espousing Chinese Communist Party propaganda and coercion and intimidation as an official U.S. government action. That's exceptional. That's a whole different level. So you've got to wonder, who's watching the watchmen? How was this person vetted? How did they get to this position? Is this a person that is an American that learned Chinese, or is this a person somehow that knows Chinese that is in America working for the federal government, but acting on the behest of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government? That's exceptionally concerning. I think we need the most robust investigation. I want to know this individual's background. I want to know why this is a line of questioning that's appropriate, and we absolutely need to be on the lookout for these kind of things, and I think we need to be proactive.
A law enforcement type official at the airport harassing an American citizen. We have freedom of religion here, and we should protect that. So I don't understand why this guy was attacking this American citizen. So it needs to be investigated. It was wrong. If it's true, there should be some disciplinary action taken.
First of all, I've seen the Shen Yun performance, and it is an outstanding portrayal and artistry combining history with art, which is a fabulous performance. But it doesn't necessarily align with the current Chinese government and the current Chinese direction. And so to see that they have been interrupted, you have to ask the question as to why. What's the motivation behind that? Then quickly get led to the question of who is it that is behind this interrogation? Apparently it was an American customs agent or agents. There's so many concerns about this because why were they targeted? We don't know that. Doesn't make sense. And who is doing the targeting? For some years there's been issues and concerns with Confucius Institutes, for example, infiltrating or potentially infiltrating our colleges. Who have we brought over and under what circumstances? Of course, in the last 3 years, we've had a largely open border, and we know that there have been many people, not just from China, but from other countries that have very little proximity to the southern border of the U.S., Middle Eastern nations and whatnot, crossing through there. Many issues hinge around not knowing and not properly controlling your borders. And this could be one of those fallout circumstances with, in this case, an art troupe being unfairly questioned when they come back into the U.S. or come to the U.S. When a sovereign nation, especially the United States of America, forfeits or allows its own rule of law to be bypassed or supplanted by any other country, any other people, then we've got a problem. So we have challenges with our leadership. We have challenges with our congressional oversight in how we look into this, and it's a very urgent matter.
A recent report from human rights organization, the Falun Dafa Information Center, found a concerning trend in how the CCP and its agents have been actively targeting Shen Yun. It details over 130 cases in 38 countries where CCP officials or their proxies have used harassment, sabotage, disinformation, and even physical attacks to try and stop the performing arts company from being able to hold its shows. To learn more about this, we spoke with Levi Brody, Executive Director of the Falun Dafa Information Center. He explained the pattern of attacks from the CCP against Shen Yun and detailed how this ties into the regime's brutal persecution of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa.
We know that this campaign is global and it's very aggressive. And so we took a look from Shen Yun's inception, which was around 2007, all the way to the present day. We found over 130 cases across 38 countries all around the world, where the Chinese regime, mostly through its diplomatic corps, which might even include the ambassador, the consul general of that host country, going after Shen Yun, trying to get the shows canceled, trying to get people not to go to the shows. So this is a very global and very aggressive campaign.
Can you give me some examples of what that's looked like?
Sure. I'll start here in the U.S. So for example, even relatively smaller markets like Little Rock, Arkansas, the theater manager there who was going to put on the Shen Yun show received like an 11, 12-page letter from the local consulate, that's back when they had a consulate in Houston, demanding that they not have the show, spewing all kinds of propaganda against Falun Gong, against Shen Yun, and making veiled threats, which again is very common, veiled threats of economic reprisals, political reprisals, not to host the show. This particular individual in Little Rock, like most of the individuals that get this kind of pressure, said, "Not on my watch, we're not doing that." And he actually held a press conference, said, "Shen Yun's welcome, this is the land of the free," and he handed the letter over to the FBI. So this is a very typical case. We've seen this happen all around the U.S., everywhere from Washington, D.C., where not only did they go after the theater, but they went after sponsors. American companies trying to sponsor Shen Yun, they were putting pressure on them, all the way out to Washington on the West Coast, Chicago, where we are here, New York. So these kind of cases have happened all over the United States. They've also happened internationally.
Why is the CCP trying so hard to stop this American Performing Arts Company from being able to show its performances?
Yeah, I mean, from the CCP's perspective, Shenyang is a perfect storm to them. And there's really 4 reasons that are distinct yet overlapping. The first reason is that Shenyang represents traditional Chinese culture, which is very spiritual. So that's the culture that the ruling Communist Party has been trying to completely obliterate in China as they try to impose Marxism on people. So here's this company trying to bring back this spiritual traditional culture, and that scares them. The second reason, though, is I think it's alluded to in the byline. If you see the tagline of Shenyang, it's China before communism. When people see the show, not only do they see, oh, this wonderful traditional culture, but they get to see what China actually looked like before communism. The implication is that's what China could look like after communism. So that's the second reason it's very scary to the CCP. The third reason is, there's the show is about 20 pieces, and they go through all different, sometimes they showcase pieces of great works of literature from Chinese culture, from different dynasties, different ethnic and regions. So it's a very diverse show, but there's a couple pieces in the show that feature modern China and the persecution of Falun Gong. So that's the third reason, because now you have something that's on the world stage that's clearly showing the Chinese regime persecuting Falun Gong. The fourth reason is the reason that most people miss, and that is, for the last 25 years, the Chinese regime has invested hundreds of millions of dollars to convince the world that Falun Gong is weird, they're unworthy victims, the persecution's not happening. It's all this propaganda they put against Falun Gong. Someone goes see Shenyang, and almost all the artists are Falun Gong practitioners, and they see these people that are incredible artists with an incredible message that are very inspiring, and that flies in the face of the CCP's vilifying propaganda against Falun Gong. So that's the fourth reason, is it's showing the world how wonderful Falun Gong is, and they're very scared about that. So all those reasons come together, and that's why most people look at this and they're like, it's just a dance show, what's the big deal? To the CCP, it's huge. It goes right to the heart of the lies and the false narratives they've used to build up their power and to maintain their power.
What is Falun Gong, and why does the CCP persecute it?
So Falun Gong is a traditional spiritual practice that originated in China. It's rooted in the Buddhist school. It involves meditation, slow motion exercises, but primarily studying Buddhist-based principles, specifically around 3 principles: truthfulness, compassion, forbearance. So to practice Falun Gong just means you meditate, you do the exercises, and you try, as you go through your life, be more honest, be more compassionate, be more tolerant. So that's what it is in its essence. But within the cultural and spiritual history of China, it really resonates because it has roots. These kind of spiritual practices were very prevalent in China for millennia. And so back in the 1990s, what's interesting is that it wasn't like it was today. It was immensely popular. You go into any town, any village, you saw Falun Gong practice sites there in the parks and other public spaces every morning as people doing the meditation exercise. It was enormously popular. And that made a lot of sense because as a spiritual practice, it really came from heartland China. It really came from the cultural fabric of that country. The problem is it became too popular. So by 1998, 100 million people practicing, that's 40 million more people than the members of the Communist Party. And a few leaders at that point said, crush it. I don't care how good it is and how wonderful it is for the Chinese people. It's too big, it's more popular than we are, crush it. And everything changed in 1999.
This raises another key question. How is it that Chinese agents are able to operate and even push CCP laws in the United States? To learn more, we spoke with Casey Fleming, CEO of Black Ops Partners. To what extent is the Chinese Communist Party, or people even influenced by it, enforcing Chinese law through the institutions in the United States?
That is actually happening every day. If you remember the Chinese police stations in New York and LA and around the country, that is enforcing CCP law through the U.S. population. And it began with going after CCP dissidents. We know that actually about 4 or 5 years ago, there were 2 black Ford, new glossy black cars driving around Silicon Valley. And they had seals on the doors that were MSS. And the MSS is a Chinese ministry of, basically it's a combination between the CIA and the FBI. So they're driving around Silicon Valley to exert their power and enforcement of the Chinese Communist Party. That was about 5 years ago. And the FBI finally got aware of it and got to the bottom of it. But that's the level. That was 5 years ago. The Chinese police stations were 2 and 3 years ago. So those have been happening. And what you have to understand, what the audience has to understand, is that that's their freedom walking out the door. When you have a foreign country coming in to a sovereign nation, exercising police control, that's a big problem. It's war. The insider threat is actual espionage and war and infiltrating spies. Period. The problem is this war is not just with military versus military. It's their entire society. The CCP has leveraged and controlled their entire society to be at war with the United States.
There are still many questions that need to be answered on what took place in Chicago on March 11th. An official complaint has been filed and several members of Congress have requested investigations. Now, on the surface, it appears to be a case of discrimination. An individual targeting an American citizen for her religious views and for protected speech. Beyond this, though, there is a deeper concern. The narratives are those being pushed by the Chinese Communist Party. And if a customs officer is enforcing those standards right here in Chicago, it could represent a case of the CCP's laws being enforced in the United States. Laws that would represent a regime that brutally suppresses religion and basic rights. Yet on an even more concerning level, the case is not isolated. It ties into a broad pattern of similar incidents. Without a doubt, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to export its policies abroad. Religious suppression, the silencing of free speech, the crushing of free expression. For Congress, this has become a top concern. The House Oversight Committee has even recently launched a new government-wide investigation into what it describes as the CCP's ongoing efforts to infiltrate and influence the United States. And here we can see the CCP's open attempts to censor, attack, and suppress an American performing arts company are exposing the network of a brutal communist regime. Diplomats, lobbyists, and possibly even U.S. government employees that is actively working within the United States to do its bidding.